My son-in-law thought he was so clever. He was in debt to loan sharks, and he dared to bring an entire gang into this house, the very place I had spent decades of sweat and sacrifice to build, for myself and my daughter, just to rob us of everything. In his mind, this was supposed to be the perfect score. The safe cracked open, piles of cash right in front of his eyes, while I would be helpless, trembling, waiting for death. But what he didn't know was that every word he spoke, every move they made, even the moment they thought they had won, it was all part of the plan I had already set in motion. And with just one small action, the entire gang collapsed right there on the spot. Before I continue, please hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing thrilling stories like this one. Now, come with me into that long night. My name is Edward Kane, 68 years old, living alone in a wooden villa by Silver Creek Lake in Oregon. This was the place my late wife, Margaret, and I spent over 30 years building and cherishing together. After she passed, I stayed, living with memories and old habits, mornings with a newspaper and a black coffee, evenings on the porch watching the lake shimmer under the sunset. This house is my entire life and my greatest pride. One December morning, my daughter Helen called, her voice trembling. "Dad, we're in serious trouble. Andrew lost his job. I can't keep up with the mortgage. Can we move in with you for a while?" I didn't hesitate for a second. Helen is everything to me, always fragile and gentle since she was a child. If I could still help her, I would, no matter my age or strength. So Helen and her husband, Andrew Collins, moved into my villa with a few suitcases and gloomy eyes. From the very first moment, I sensed Andrew wasn't exactly a man in despair. Instead of gratitude, his eyes roamed the house like a real estate broker, appraising its value. From the leather sofa set, the oil painting on the wall, to the safe embedded in the living room wall. He chuckled. "Beautiful place, Mr. Kane. This villa must be worth over $2.3 million on the market today." I just nodded slightly. Day by day, Andrew kept bringing up the neighborhood's security, insurance policies, and property papers. At dinner, he pressed me with questions that had nothing to do with casual talk. "Mr. Edward, is your upstairs safe mechanical or electronic?" I froze, my fork hanging midair. I forced a stiff smile. "Everything is already taken care of. My daughter knows all she needs to know." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "What about the key? You're sure Helen knows about it, right?" In that instant, my blood turned cold. The small brass key hidden in my bedroom drawer. Even Helen had no idea about it. And yet Andrew mentioned it. Helen looked puzzled. "What key?" He slipped out smoothly. "The other day I had a headache, went looking for aspirin, must have opened the wrong drawer. But I knew aspirin was always in the bathroom cabinet, never in that drawer." That night, as I passed the hallway, I saw my bedroom door slightly ajar, a dim strip of light leaking through. I was always meticulous, always kept it shut tight, but this time it hung open, unnaturally still. I stepped in. Everything seemed in place, the bed neatly made, the lamp where it belonged, my reading glasses on the nightstand. But my seasoned eyes spotted it. The second drawer wasn't flush, a corner of a folder sticking out. I pulled it open. Papers were shuffled. The will was no longer where it belonged, and the brass key had vanished. I didn't tremble. Instead, I felt heat rise in my face. Someone, Andrew precisely, had violated the most private part of my life. But he was wrong. He thought I was just a harmless old man. He had no idea I had spent 30 years as an insurance investigator, unmasking scammers far more cunning than him. I closed the drawer, put everything back, and sat on the edge of my bed. For the first time, I felt small in my own house. Maybe, in this game, he was the one leading, and I was just an old man dragged along. I don't know how long I sat frozen there that night. All I know is the villa was wrapped in a thick silence. the kind I once found comforting, but now felt suffocating. The grandfather clock downstairs struck rhythmically, each chime like a countdown to something inevitable. Close to midnight, I heard footsteps. They weren't Helen's light and familiar ones, but heavy, cautious, as if deliberately placed to avoid squeaky spots. But after living alone here for over 20 years, any strange sound stood out clear as day. I held my breath, eyes fixed on the bedroom door left slightly ajar. A shadow slipped past, then silence. I pressed my ear to the floorboards above the vent that connected to the living room. This old house could be inconvenient, but sometimes it gave me strange advantages. Sounds from downstairs often echoed up distinctly. Seconds later, I caught a whisper. It was Andrew's voice. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep." My chest tightened, muscles rigid. He wasn't calling a recruiter or a friend like he told Helen. I strained, fists clutching the bedsheet. I found everything. Bank papers, investment portfolios, even the life insurance policy. This old man is loaded, way more than I thought. We're talking six figures, you get it? Around $120,000 might just be the tip of the iceberg. I bit my lip until it bled. Every word was a blade carving into me. His voice dropped lower, faster. "Tomorrow night. Helen has her book club meeting from 7 to 9. Perfect window. I already have the key. We'll do it then." In that moment, only one word filled my mind. Betrayal. I pulled out the old phone from my nightstand, opened the recording app, my hands trembling but steady enough. If I only told Helen, she would never believe me. She loved him too much. She'd think I was paranoid or confused with age. I needed proof. The sound through the vent rose and fell, but every word was clear. Andrew talked about debts. I heard him confess, "I owe them, the loan sharks in Portland. If I don't pay soon, I'm dead. Vince is pressing hard. You know Vince Romano, right? He doesn't give anyone extensions. I've got no other way out." That name sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know him personally, but the stories were enough. A loan shark with razor-sharp terms. A man who owned entire underground blocks. If Andrew was tangled with him, then this wasn't about a struggling family anymore. He paused for a moment as if listening to the other end, then continued, his voice lowered. "Trust me, he doesn't suspect a thing. Just a widowed old man with short-term memory, living alone by the lake. Who would ever guess? I even pretended to care about security, so he would spill the details himself. Ha! Easy as candy." His mocking laugh stabbed into my chest. I forced myself to stay calm, pressing the phone tighter to make sure every sound was being recorded. He added, "Once this is done, I'll tell Helen I got a job offer in another state. We'll disappear before he realizes anything. And if something comes up, I'll just blame it on his old age and failing memory. Who would believe a 68-year-old man remembers every detail clearly?" I drew in a sharp breath, my heart racing. He had already mapped out an escape route. He didn't just want the money. He planned to steal my daughter's trust, to make me look senile to cover his crime. The recorder on my phone glowed faintly under the pillow, seconds ticking steadily away. Then I heard the scrape of a chair, heavy footsteps heading toward the stairs. He was coming back. I quickly shut off the screen, slid the phone under the pillow, and lay on my side, pretending to sleep. My door creaked open, the hallway light spilling in. I kept my breathing slow and steady, like an old man deep in sleep. Andrew's shadow lingered for a few seconds, then vanished. The door closed. In the dark, I opened my eyes, staring into nothingness. That night, I did not sleep at all. I knew from then on that this house was no longer a peaceful home. It had become a battlefield. When dawn lit the pines along the lake, I sat dazed in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a coffee cup I couldn't bring myself to drink. I had my first recording, my first piece of evidence, but I also knew that against a man cornered by a debt of $120,000, this alone wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to know who he met, what he planned. Only then could I prepare for the confrontation ahead. And while Helen still trusted her husband blindly, I quietly decided, tonight, no matter what, I had to follow him. I had to see with my own eyes the man Andrew called Vince Romano, to know exactly what darkness I was up against. Before leaving the kitchen, I suddenly thought of the wooden drawer in my room. Instinct urged me to check it. When I pulled it open, my heart nearly stopped. The safe key was back in its place, lying as if untouched. But I knew Andrew had boasted on the phone that he had the key. The strip of tape I once used was replaced clumsily, and new scratches marked the brass. He had taken it and then put it back, trying to cover his tracks. The sight made my blood boil. Right then, I swore I would not give him a second chance. An idea began to form in my mind, a fake key. Sitting alone in that silent room, I suddenly remembered the early days of building this house. Back then, Margaret and I saved every penny, hired carpenters, bought wood, and together built each window frame, each step of the porch. This porch by the lake had once been where 3-year-old Helen ran around gathering pine cones, falling flat but laughing brightly. This house wasn't just shelter, it was my life, my wife's memory, my daughter's childhood. The thought of Andrew scheming for it all crushed my heart. The next morning I sat for hours in the kitchen clutching a cold coffee, my mind crowded with unanswered questions. Helen came down, her hair loose, carrying the scent of shampoo. I gathered my courage to ask, "Helen, Andrew has been going out late at night. Do you know where he's been?" She looked up, her eyes round with trust. "Dad, he's just trying to find a job. He's under so much pressure." "Don't worry too much," I spoke slowly. "But I feel something's not right." I heard. Before I could finish, Helen cut me off, her voice tinged with reproach. "Dad, you've been too suspicious lately. You haven't been sleeping. I'm more worried about your health. Andrew would never do anything wrong to you." "I trust him." I froze. Her words pierced me like an icy blade. My daughter, whom I had raised all these years, now doubted me in defending her husband. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, pretending to agree, but inside I was shattered. At that moment I understood. I couldn't rely on words. I needed to see with my own eyes, hear with my own ears. And if I wanted to save my daughter from ruin, one recording wasn't enough. I needed the truth laid bare. A little later, Andrew came downstairs, oddly well-dressed, freshly shaved. He looked at me with calm eyes, even a trace of cheer, nothing like a man beaten by unemployment. Taking the coffee Helen gave him, he sat casually. "I've got a few important calls today, maybe meeting some old friends," he said lightly. Helen smiled, supportive, not a hint of doubt. But to me, each word was a knife. When she busied herself with lunch preparations, I slipped away to my room, phone in hand. I knew I needed more evidence, and the only way was to follow him. 30 years of insurance. Investigations had taught me, never rush to judgment. Let the subject reveal himself. Early in the afternoon, Andrew put on a heavy coat and left, claiming he had an interview. I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my old sedan's keys and drove after him at a safe distance. The December sky was gray, the air bitterly cold, the narrow road toward Portland empty. I stayed back, eyes fixed on his taillights. Half an hour later, he turned into a run-down industrial street I rarely visited. Abandoned warehouses, old repair shops, graffiti-smeared walls. I parked in a dark corner, engine off, watching. His car stopped at a derelict garage, its rusty metal door leaking faint yellow light. He stepped out, scanning the area. 2 heavy-set men approached, one thick-necked with tattoos crawling up his skin, the other tall and shifty-eyed. I didn't know them, but menace was etched in every move. One of them pounded on the metal door, 3 short knocks, 1 long. The door swung open and the 3 slipped inside. My heart pounded as I waited. Then I made my decision. Pressing against the cold brick wall, I edged closer. The door wasn't shut tight, a narrow gap left open, enough for me to lean in, eyes and ears straining. Inside, under the dim yellow light, Andrew's shadow, moved. He was speaking, trying to sound calm. "Tomorrow night, when Helen goes to her club, I'll enter my father-in-law's room, open the safe. I've got the key." A deep, commanding voice thundered back, so powerful I didn't need to see the face to know this was the leader. $120,000, he said. "Bring it all, and your debt is cleared. If there's more, I might let you keep a bit. But if it's less, or if there's no money, then your life ends here, Andrew." Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Andrew stammered, I understand. I'll do it, I swear. He's old, he won't suspect a thing." The tattooed brute chuckled darkly. "You sure? I heard the old man is meticulous, not easy to fool." Andrew rushed to assure him, "I've been living with him for weeks. I know all his habits. I know everything he does. Tonight, I'll pretend to worry about security and ask him more questions. He's not sharp anymore." Laughter erupted, harsh and echoing through the garage. I pulled back, heart hammering, hands trembling, sweat cold on my forehead. I had just witnessed a death trap laid out plain. This wasn't just about stealing money. It was a death sentence hanging over Andrew, with my family at risk of being dragged under too. Back in my car, gasping for breath, the chilling voice of Vince Romano echoed in my mind. "If it's less, or if there's no money, then your life ends here." More than ever, I understood that my daughter had unknowingly married a man who wasn't just a traitor. He had dragged this family into the blood-soaked grip of the underworld. I couldn't stand alone anymore. I needed someone who knew the law, who knew how to fight criminals, if I wanted any chance of saving Helen. And in that moment, only one name came to mind. Richard Miller, my old friend and the lawyer I trusted above all. That evening, when I drove back to the lakeside villa, Helen was in the kitchen fussing over dinner, while Andrew lounged on the sofa, eyes glued to the TV like any ordinary man. No one could have imagined that just hours earlier he had been trembling in front of a notorious loan shark, begging to survive a debt of $120,000. I looked at him, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to rush over, grab him by the collar, and shout out everything I had just witnessed. But Helen's eyes lit up when she saw me walk in. She called out, "Dad, you're back. Are you tired? I just reheated your favorite stew." I swallowed hard, forced a smile, and nodded quietly. For Helen's sake, I had to hold back. Dinner passed in silence. Just as Andrew was about to make an excuse to go somewhere, Helen blurted out, "Oh, Dad, I'm not going to book club tomorrow. Becky in the group is sick, so we decided to move it to the night after tomorrow. That means I can stay home with you and Andrew." I shot a glance at Andrew. For a split second, his face froze, as if he had been slapped. Then he forced a stiff smile. I clearly saw his eyes flick toward me, darkening like they held a flame. The plan he had set for tomorrow night had just gone up in smoke, but I knew he wouldn't give up. He would simply push it back, and I had gained 48 precious hours. That night, I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. Vince Romano's words kept echoing in my head. "If it's less, or if there's no money, then your life ends here." A man like that, I knew, wasn't joking. And Andrew, he would drag Helen down that dead-end road with him. No, I couldn't sit still. I needed someone with knowledge and experience, someone I could trust to keep me clear-headed. And I thought immediately of Richard Miller. Richard had been my colleague back when I worked as an insurance investigator. Later, he became a lawyer, specializing in fraud and financial crimes. We hadn't seen each other in a long time, but I still had his number. Late at night, I picked up the phone, hesitated a few times, then finally dialed. His familiar deep voice came through, slightly hoarse but warm. "Edward? It's been a while. Why are you calling at this hour?" I swallowed and said briefly, "I need to see you. It's urgent." "Tomorrow, the old cafe, at 9 in the morning." The next morning, I used a trip to the market as an excuse and drove straight into town. The cafe on the corner of Main was just the same. The smell of baked goods, old wooden tables, soft jazz playing. Richard was already there in a gray suit, silver hair, eyes sharp as a blade. He looked at me and raised an eyebrow slightly. "You don't look well." What happened? I sat down, my hands trembling on the table. Then, like water long dammed up, it all came out. From when Andrew moved in, the suggestive questions, the missing key, to the phone call I overheard the night before, and the scene I witnessed of him meeting the mob. Richard didn't interrupt, just listened, his deep eyes fixed on me. When I finished, he sighed and spoke slowly. "Edward, do you realize how serious this is? This isn't a family matter anymore. This is organized crime. If it truly is Vince Romano, he's extremely dangerous." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "I don't care about Andrew," I said hoarsely. "He betrayed my daughter's trust. But Helen, she still believes in him. I need to show her the truth, with evidence that can't be denied." Richard studied me for a long moment, and then nodded. "All right? But you have to do it the right way. If you confront them on your own, 1, you'll get hurt, and 2, the evidence won't hold up in court. The only way is to make them expose themselves, and you must collect the evidence legally. Oregon follows one-party consent, which means you can record audio and video when you're present. So turn your house into the place where they reveal their crimes." I frowned. "You mean install devices?" Richard nodded. "Small cameras, a recording mic. Ideally, set them in your room where Andrew is certain to search. When he acts, you'll have both images and sound. Impossible to refute. The key is to stay calm, act like you suspect nothing. Don't let him catch on." I drew a long breath. "But it's not just Andrew. There's Vince and his men. What if they show up?" Richard replied. "That's why you need me. I'll reach out to officers I know, but we need evidence first. One recording you overheard isn't enough. We need the police to catch them in the act, when he, or the whole crew, moves. That way you protect Helen and make them pay under the law." I sat in silence, my heart heavy. My rational side knew he was right, but my emotions hurt. I didn't want to drag Helen into such a staged setup, but I had no choice. "All right," I said, my voice steadier. "I'll do it." Richard placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes resolute. "Edward, you're old, but you're not weak. This isn't just about money, it's about your daughter's safety. Remember, stay calm, act like you know nothing. The rest, let the law and the truth handle." That afternoon, I drove back to Silver Creek with a list in my pocket. Buy a small camera, a recording device, and a few items for concealment. Helen asked where I had been, and I brushed it off, saying I wanted to pick up a few things to fix the storage room. She believed it immediately, smiling with relief. Andrew only glanced at me, a flicker of scrutiny in his eyes. I made a point of sighing and feigning fatigue, so he'd think I had no energy for anything else. That night, after Helen went to bed early, Andrew sat in the living room absorbed in his phone. I quietly carried the packages I'd bought up to my room and set them in the drawer. Inside was a tiny black camera, half the size of a cigarette pack that could connect to my phone. I held it, my palms damp with sweat, but I remembered Richard's words. "Don't let him see a change in you. Calm, natural." That night, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight ripple across the lake. Helen slept soundly in her room. Andrew hadn't come up yet, likely whispering into his phone somewhere. I closed my eyes and told myself, tomorrow I begin. Tomorrow this house becomes the place where he exposes his true nature, and in just 2 more nights, everything will be decided. The next morning, thin sunlight slipped through my window frame, but there was no peace in my heart. Ever since I left the cafe with Richard, one thought consumed me. Time. I had less than 2 days to turn this house into a trap. I started by checking the packages I had brought home. The small jet black camera with a magnetic mount, a slender microphone that could be disguised inside an outlet, and a few odds and ends like tape, cables, and memory cards. Each tiny item to me was no different from a piece of weaponry, for the silent war ahead. I chose the moment Helen went out to buy groceries to act. Andrew said he needed to make a phone call about an interview, so he stayed home. I went upstairs, heart pounding. It felt like I was gambling with my life inside the very house that had once been my sanctuary. The first camera I mounted on the bookshelf beside my bed. I stacked a few hardcovers to hide it, leaving only a narrow slit for the lens. When I opened the app on my phone, the screen lit up, showing every corner of my room in sharp detail. I tested it, walking across, sitting on the bed, leaving the room. When I replayed the footage, the image was clear and even the creak of the floorboards echoed. I exhaled with relief. The second camera I planned for the hallway outside my bedroom, where Andrew would have to pass if he tried to sneak in. I pried open the frame of an old painting, tucked the device inside, and left a hole no bigger than a nail head. Even I, if I didn't know, would never have noticed. But just as I was leaning in to adjust the frame, a voice came from behind. "What are you doing, Dad?" I jolted. Turning, I saw Andrew standing there, eyes narrowed, lips curled. I forced my voice steady. "The screws on this frame are loose. I was worried it might fall. Just fixing it." Andrew stepped closer, watching me longer than necessary, then shrugged. "You're careful, that's for sure." Old folks usually fuss over little details like that. His words sounded casual, but the sting was there. I gave a thin smile, turned back as if unconcerned. Only when he walked downstairs did the sweat break across my back. He was starting to suspect. That evening, Helen cheerfully told me her book club was definitely postponed until the day after tomorrow. She was excited to spend more time at home. I looked at her, hiding my worry. Andrew sat beside her, expression blank, but I saw his fingers tapping on his thigh, a rhythm tight and restless. When Helen went up early, I stayed in the kitchen pretending to tidy. The dim yellow light reflected Andrew's silhouette, still on the sofa, eyes locked on me without blinking. The silence was so heavy that a dropped spoon would have sounded like thunder. "You've been busy lately, Dad," he said lightly, but his eyes probed. "I'm just used to keeping my hands occupied," I replied, rinsing a glass slowly. "At this age, it's hard to sit idle." He smirked. "Right. Old people always need to keep busy to feel useful." I didn't answer, but the barb sank deep. He was probing, testing me. Late at night, alone in my room, I checked the devices again. The phone screen showed sharp feeds from both cameras. I enabled motion-triggered recording. Now, if Andrew or anyone stepped inside, everything would be captured. But machines weren't enough. I thought of an extra snare. In the drawer where I used to hide the key, I planted a fake one. Beneath the drawer, I placed a small capsule filled with ultrafine powder. Anyone reaching deep inside would trigger it, coating their hands and clothes. Harmless, but unmistakable. I didn't just want the betrayer caught. I wanted him marked, exposed. As I prepared in silence, I realized this house, once a comfort, had become a battlefield. A quiet war where Andrew and I measured each other's steps. He thought I was old, easy prey. He didn't know that every heartbeat of mine had become resolved. Helen remained innocent, unaware. She kissed my cheek goodnight, her eyes glowing with trust. I stroked her hair, my throat tight. Inside, I swore I would shield her from this nightmare, whatever it took. Outside, the lake shimmered under moonlight, the night wind cold. I sat watching my phone screen, empty rooms glowing in infrared. Just 2 more nights, I told myself. 2 more nights until the truth broke free. And I knew, when that night came, Andrew would not be alone. The shadow of Vince Romano and his thugs was circling, waiting. The following evening, the villa carried an eerie stillness. Helen, getting ready for her book club, slipped into a simple floral dress, kissed my cheek, and said, "Rest early, Dad. I'll be home before 9. I forced a smile, heart heavy as stone. She didn't know that her absence would draw out the ugliest truth. The door shut. Her car faded into the distance, leaving a silence that pressed in on every wall. Andrew stood at the window watching, lips curling into a thin smile. the kind only greed could carve. "You look tired, Dad. Why don't you turn in early?" he said, half concern, half probe. "I was planning to," I answered, moving with deliberate slowness up the stairs, letting him believe the prey had settled into sleep. In my room, I left the door ajar and dimmed the lights. The camera's infrared winked to life. In the drawer, the fake key, placed just right, and behind it, the powder trap. My phone slipped into my pocket. Screen dark. I lay on the bed, breathing evenly like an exhausted old man, but my ears strained. Around 8, Andrew's whisper rose through the vent. "Yeah, tonight. Helen's gone. I have the key. Be ready. Romano, you'll get the money. 120 grand. Debt paid." I clenched my fist. He didn't know the key was bait. Minutes later, the heavy tread of footsteps came up the stairs. Slow, careful, but to me, each thump was a blade. The doorknob turned and a thin strip of light slid in. Andrew stood there, tall, his shadow stretching across the floorboards. He listened, and then slipped inside, moving toward the drawer. The creak of wood, the drawer sliding. His breath caught. He saw the key. Silence thickened, pressing on us both. His hand reached deep, the faint clink of metal as he gripped the fake key. He inhaled sharply, like a man grasping his future. Then, pop! A muffled burst filled the still room. A cloud of shimmering powder exploded, coating his hair, his clothes, his face. "Damn it!" he cursed, stumbling back, eyes squinting as the dust stung. He clawed at himself, but the more he brushed, the more the golden haze spread, painting him into a glowing figure of shame. I flicked on the bedside lamp, feigning groggy surprise. "What's going on here?" The light fell, revealing Andrew, my son-in-law, standing in my room, smeared in golden powder, the fake key betraying him in his hand. "Andrew?" I rasped, my voice sharp with mock shock. "What are you doing in my room at this hour?" He stammered, choking on lies. I heard a noise, thought there was an intruder. I just came to check." "Check my drawer?" I pressed, eyes locked on his. "With this key?" Before he could twist further, the sound of a car door slamming outside. My stomach dropped. "No." Helen, the front door opened. Her voice carried up, rushed. "Dad, I'm back." The wind picked up, so the meeting ended early. Andrew froze, the blood draining from his face. The bedroom door flew open. Helen stepped in, hair tousled by the storm. She froze, her world cracking in a heartbeat. Her husband, covered in golden dust, clutching a key inside her father's room. "Oh my God!" she gasped. "Andrew, what are you doing?" He stumbled, his voice breaking. I was just worried about your dad. I heard a noise, and at midnight, in my father's private room, with the safe key." Helen's voice was shattered, straining between shock and pain. I sat up, my tone firm. "Helen, you've seen enough. I don't need to explain." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me, then turned to her husband. Her gaze was lost, like someone watching her whole world collapse. Andrew lurched towards her, hand outstretched. "Helen, don't believe this. I'm being set up. Your father staged this." Helen's voice cut sharply for the first time. "Staged? I just saw you in my father's room." "Explain this, Andrew," he faltered, sweat mingling with powder dripping down his face. Then his eyes blazed at me, cornered. "You old man, you ruined everything. Don't think you're smarter than me." The air thickened. Helen stood trembling between us, but her eyes had changed. No longer the blind trust of a wife, but the cold gaze of a woman who had seen betrayal laid bare. Helen had not yet caught her breath from the shock when a heavy thud sounded downstairs. Crash! The front door was kicked open, hinges popping off. The stomp of boots pounded across the wooden floor. Helen and I turned at the same time. Andrew's face went pale. Then figures appeared. Vince Romano, massive, in a dark leather coat, followed by 2 tattooed henchmen with bloodshot eyes. "Sorry for not knocking," Vince sneered, his voice like rolling gravel. "But when we come to collect, we prefer the direct way." One thug lunged forward and clamped onto Helen's arm, making her cry out in pain. I rushed toward my daughter, but was shoved hard by the other thug, stumbling into the corner wall. The chill of the wall cut through my back, but colder still was the helplessness of watching my child being restrained. Andrew panicked. "Wait! What are you doing? I said tonight I would—" "Shut up," Vince growled, stepping close to him. "You've made plenty of promises, Andrew." "Where's the money?" 120,000. "Enough, and we're done. Extra, and we split. Short or nothing, and your body floats out on the lake. That's simple." Helen snapped toward her husband, eyes brimming. You really owe them." 120,000. Andrew trembled, lips quivering, but had no time to answer. Vince barked a dry laugh. "He didn't tell you? Your husband owes me down to the last cent. And who pointed me here?" "He did." The words struck like thunder. Helen went still, her tearful eyes filled with disgust and despair. I didn't want this, Helen." Andrew reached out, but a henchman pinned his shoulders. The powder on him shook loose, making the scene even more absurd. "Enough!" Helen screamed, her voice cracking. "You betrayed my father. You sold out this entire family." I forced myself up and snarled at Vince. "If you want money, take it." "But leave my daughter alone." Vince squinted at me with contempt. "Old man, you talk cute. But you know, from the moment I walked in, something about you felt off. Your eyes, the way you stood up too fast. I've lived my whole life in the dark, and my gut says you're hiding something." He signaled his men. "Search. If there's anything odd, bring it out." One thug moved in, eyes sweeping the room. He bent to the bookshelf, groped around, and seconds later yanked out a tiny camera, its infrared still blinking. "Boss, got something!" he shouted, then smashed it to the floor. Crack! The plastic shell burst, parts scattering. The other thug tore a small recorder from behind an outlet and crushed it like a toy. Vince watched, smirking in triumph. "Well, I was right. You're crafty, old man. But that's over now. No evidence left." Helen sobbed, staring at me in despair. She understood that in this moment, both father and daughter were being cornered. Andrew shivered, still pleading. "Vince, please, I brought you here. Don't forget our deal." "Deal?" Vince roared with laughter. "You thought I'd split." "No, Andrew. From now on, I take everything. You're nothing but a mutt that led the way." Each word sliced away the last scrap of Andrew's pride. Helen looked at her husband, tears rolling, her voice breaking. You brought them to my father's house. You did." The air congealed, dust, sweat, and the stench of betrayal. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to stand straight. I would not collapse in front of my child. Vince stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Tonight, everything here is mine. The old man, the girl, and the useless husband. Keep quiet and keep breathing. Fight back, and I'll drown this house in blood." The room was thick with ragged breaths. Vince glanced at his men, pleased after smashing the camera and mic, then turned back with a cold smile. "So that's that, old man. You think you're clever? We live on blood and debt. Your childish tricks fool no one. It's all erased. No one will believe you." Helen shook, held tight by a thug. She struggled and got only a brutal squeeze in return. Andrew, face blotched with golden powder, tried a weak smile. "Vince, you see now. There's nothing left. I kept my word. Give me a cut, and I'll disappear with Helen." "Shut up!" Vince bellowed, slapping Andrew hard, the dry crack echoing. "You owe me, then dragged me to your father-in-law's house, and now you dare ask for a cut? Last time, every dollar is mine." Helen cried out, tears streaming. "You're insane, Andrew." "Why did you bring them to my father's house?" Andrew staggered, clutching his cheek, but hatred flared in his eyes at me. "It's all this old man's fault. If he'd helped me from the start, I wouldn't have—" I met his gaze, my voice iron low. "You didn't sacrifice for anyone, Andrew. You sacrificed to your own greed and debt." The tension was tight as a drawn string. Vince narrowed his eyes and flicked his hand. "Enough. Old man, hand over the safe key. If not, your daughter pays first. A thug pulled a gleaming knife and pressed it to Helen's throat. She screamed, eyes wild with fear. I had to step slowly toward the cabinet, a storm inside with a face of resignation. I took the key from the drawer, my hand shaking as I held it out. Smart! Vince snapped, snatching it and nodding to his men. He barked, Open it! The safe clicked, and the heavy steel door swung wide. Bundles of cash, crisply banded, glowed under the yellow light. Not a small amount, enough to make all three thugs gape. Ha! Vince roared with delight, eyes blazing with greed. More than I thought. A real fortune. Tonight, it's all mine. The two henchmen whooped, hands trembling as they flipped through the stacks, the rustle of bills like music to them. Andrew watched, hope flaring. Vince? See now? I kept my word. Just give me a share. Vince whipped around with a vicious grin. A share? I told you, Andrew, you're just a guide dog. From now on, you're worthless. Andrew turned ashen, shaking from head to toe. Helen looked at her husband, eyes wet, torn between love for her father and hatred for the traitor, stripped bare before her. At the very moment, Vince threw his head back laughing, and his men hugged the cash like trophies. Bang! The front door blasted open. Police! Don't move! Drop the weapons! A rush of boots thundered up the stairs, beams of flashlights slicing through the doorway. In a blink, more than half a dozen officers swarmed in, guns trained on Vince and his crew. Vince froze, his grin petrified. His men dropped the bundles, faces bloodless. Andrew collapsed, and Helen stood stunned, tears still on her cheeks. An officer shouted, Knife down! On your knees now! Vince snarled, eyes sparking. Impossible. How did you get here so fast? I slowly pulled my old phone from my breast pocket. The screen still glowed faintly, the call still connected. My voice was low and clear. I didn't need cameras. I didn't need a mic. I opened a live line with my lawyer before you walked in. Everything you just said has been recorded. Helen choked and clutched me tight. She understood my calm was not despair. It was a careful plan to the very end. The police moved in, pinning Vince and his men, cuffing each one and reading their rights. Vince still thrashed, met only by the cold stare of barrels of guns. I looked at Andrew, my son-in-law, collapsed in the room, face streaked with powder and tears. He was no husband, no man, only a traitor laid bare to the bone. Helen turned away, unable to look a second longer. The room was thick with ragged breaths. Vince glanced at his two men, pleased after smashing the camera and the mic, then turned back with a cold smile. So that's that, old man. You think you're clever? We live on blood and debt. Your childish tricks fool no one. It's all erased. No one will believe you. Helen trembled, held tight by a thug. She struggled, but all she got in return was a brutal squeeze. Andrew, his face smeared with golden dust, tried to force a smile to appease. Vince, now you see? There's nothing left. I kept my word. Just give me a share, and I'll disappear with Helen. Shut up! Vince roared, slapping Andrew. Hard, the dry crack echoing. You owe me, then dragged me to your father-in-law's house, and now you dare to ask for a share? One last time, every dollar is mine, Helen cried out, tears streaming. You're insane, Andrew. Why would you bring them into my father's house? Andrew staggered, clutching his cheek, but his eyes burned with resentment toward me. It's all this old man's fault. If he had helped me from the start, I wouldn't have had to. I locked eyes with him, my voice heavy as iron. You didn't sacrifice for anyone, Andrew. You sacrificed to your own greed and debts. The tension was tight as a wire. Vince narrowed his eyes, flicked his hand. Enough. Old man, hand over the safe key. If not, your daughter will be the first to pay. One thug drew a gleaming knife, pressing it against Helen's throat. She screamed, eyes wide with terror. I was forced to step slowly toward the cabinet, storm raging inside, though my face stayed resigned. I pulled the key from the drawer, my hand trembling as I held it out. Smart! Vince snarled, snatching it and signaling his men. He barked, "Open it!" The safe clanked. Then the heavy steel door swung wide. Bundles of cash bound tight, crisp bills gleaming under the yellow light. One thug gawked, nearly shouting, "God! At least 300 or 400 grand! The old man's lifetime savings. Ha!" Vince bellowed with delight, eyes blazing with greed. "More than I imagined. A fortune in truth. Tonight, it's all mine." The two thugs laughed with glee, hands trembling as they flipped through bundles, the rustle of bills like music to their ears. Andrew stared, hope lighting his eyes. "Vince, now you see? I kept my word. Just give me a share." Vince whipped around, a vicious grin splitting his face. "A share? I told you, Andrew. You're just a guide dog. From now on, you're worthless." Andrew turned ashen, shaking from head to toe. Helen looked at her husband, tears brimming, torn between love for her father and hatred for the traitor laid bare. At that very moment, as Vince threw back his head laughing, his men clutching cash like trophies, bang! The front door blasted open. "Police! Don't move! Drop your weapons!" The thunder of boots on the stairs, flashlights cutting through the doorway. In an instant, more than half a dozen officers stormed in, guns aimed at Vince and his crew. Vince froze, his grin petrified. His men dropped the bundles, faces drained of blood. Andrew collapsed, and Helen stood frozen, tears streaking her cheeks. An officer shouted, "Drop the knife!" "On your knees now," Vince snarled, eyes spitting fire. "Impossible! How did you get here so fast?" I slowly pulled my old phone from my pocket. The screen still glowed faintly, the call still connected. My voice was low and steady. I set cameras. I set mics. But what you didn't know, I opened a live line with my lawyer before you even walked in. Everything you just said has been recorded. In that moment, the room exploded again, not with gunfire, but with truth. Helen sobbed and clutched me tight, breaking down as she realized her father had never given up. Vince's eyes bulged, and he roared in rage. "You old bastard! You played me from the start?" He thrashed, but officers slammed him to the ground, cuffs clicking shut. Andrew looked at me, eyes filled with horror and bitterness. He finally understood. It hadn't been chance, but his father-in-law's plan all along. The shame and defeat crushed him, leaving him on his knees, speechless. 3 months after that night, I sat in the Multnomah County Courthouse, cold white light falling on the wooden benches. No golden dust, no whispered threats in the dark, only raw truth laid before justice. At the defendant's bench sat Vince Romano, hands shackled, once arrogant, but now gaunt and hollow-eyed. Beside him, his two henchmen hunched low, stripped of their swagger. Andrew sat apart, in an orange jumpsuit, eyes sunken, gaze lost like a man who had lost everything. The prosecutor stood tall, voice clear. The evidence is overwhelming. Conversations, threats, and a conspiracy to commit theft have all been fully recorded. We also recovered physical evidence: the knife, the cash, and fingerprints inside Mr. Edward Kane's Safe Richard, my lawyer, sat in the front row, nodding as the recording was played. Vince's voice boomed through the speakers, "Enough, and we're done." Extra, and we split. Short, and the body floats on the lake. His dry laugh, Andrew's begging, Helen's sobbing, all struck the courtroom like hammers of fate. The judge, an older man with silver hair, brought down his gavel. Vince Romano, 25 years in prison for loan sharking, threats to life, and conspiracy to commit organized theft. 2 accomplices, 15 years each. Andrew Collins, 12 years for conspiracy, incitement, and aiding criminal activity. The gavel's crack was thunder, closing the book on their vile game. Helen sat beside me, her eyes red but burning bright. She had heard the verdict with all the courage a betrayed woman could summon. Andrew turned, desperate. "Helen, forgive me. I was forced." Helen gripped my hand tight, not looking back. "You didn't just betray my father. You betrayed your own family. From now on, there's nothing left between us." That ended every tie. I looked at my daughter, and in her eyes I saw new steel, a fire I had never seen before. No longer a naive wife blinded by trust, she had grown through pain, choosing to protect her father and herself. As the police led the criminals away, Vince shot me a glare full of hatred. Andrew only hung his head, shuffling, stripped of the arrogance of a man who once called his father-in-law a senile old fool. I drew a deep breath, as if lifting months of weight from my chest. Richard patted my shoulder, his voice relieved. "You did the right thing." Not many would face it the way you did. Outside the courthouse, the Portland sky was rare and clear. Helen held my arm, her smile weak but resolute. "Dad, let's go home. I think it's time we start again." We walked away, leaving behind a story of tears, betrayal, and blood, but closed at last by justice. I knew some battles don't choose age, and sometimes silence, patience, and faith are the sharpest weapons. That story ended, but the lesson remains. Never underestimate an old man, especially when he has a reason to fight. If you believe this story was worth hearing, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to tell me where you're listening from. Your support is the reason I can keep sharing these gripping, breathless tales. Thank you so much for staying until the end, and I'll see you in the next story.